My name is Angie Schmidt-Whitney. I'm the Executive Director of the Experience and Professional Development Office, or XPD. You should be here either with Jonathan or Sucharita's class. If you're not, I'm still glad you're here. And so the topic today is succeeding in a diverse workplace. I wanted to give an introduction to that. I know because of the classes you're in, you all here represent a variety of majors. And beyond that, we know there's a lot more to each of you beyond just your major. Like in academics, there's so often like, what's your major? It turns out there's more to who you are. We talk a lot about our alum network as well. You've probably heard people say once a Benny or once a Johnny. You're always a Benny or you're always a Johnny. But we wanted to dig a little bit more into like, what does that actually mean when you're in the workplace? And what does that wind up looking like? So whatever all of you wind up doing after St. Ben's and St. John's, in a way, you're always representing St. Ben's and St. John's because you do have that Benny or Johnny title attached to you. And so today we wanted to provide an opportunity for you to hear from the three fabulous alums you see on the screen about their own transition from being a student to an employee, and then what that looks like in today's world where diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice are paramount in the success of many organizations. That's the frame of what we're hoping to kind of, well, I can't just say frame again, but I'm going to frame today's conversation. And so for the three of you fabulous alums, I'm wondering, I'll let you pick order. I won't make eye contact. Oh, that was funny, you're supposed to laugh. But give us an overview of your path since St. Ben's, St. John's. Do include what your major was, and then any significant involvement while you were here. And yeah, by the way, what are you doing now? So major, a little bit about your path, and what you're currently doing. Who wants to start?
Can I nominate the most senior of our group?
Yes, Nick, you're up. Yes. Plus you weren't muted, Nick, so it's all over.
Oh, wow. Okay, you're gonna go there right away. I see that. Okay. Well, welcome. I'm Nick Leonard. I graduated in 1995, making me the most senior, possibly on the whole, in this whole rooms and everything. So my background started out at St. John's. I grew up in a small town, Walnut Grove, went to St. John's, and I started in physics, but ended up studying biology. I was a major in biology and environmental studies, and I was one of the first environmental studies minors that was ever available. And I was participating in the honors program, so I did my honors thesis on looking at the impact of the wastewater treatment plant on the biology of the lakes on campus, and how it affected the fauna and the flora. So did that. I was also played volleyball and coached at St. Ben's for 3 years. Involved in the green team. I think I really enjoyed myself having a balanced liberal arts background. I think it was helpful because I wasn't sure. I kind of started, I think I was in physics and thinking engineering, and then found a new path in environmental passion. After that, I came out during the early 90s, which was, I was one of the few people at the time that was out and about a gay man. So that was kind of a unique experience for me, especially at a Catholic university in the early 90s. From there, I was trying to decide, should I go more science or social activism? I ended up going to law school at the University of Minnesota. And from there, I was focused on environmental law. But because of my science background, I also did some intellectual property work. So I worked at the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy, but then at the end of graduating, some big firms offered me a lot of money and I had a lot of loans. And so I kind of was drawn to do IP work at some of the national law firms for several years. After 9/11 happened, I kind of reevaluated my life and decided to quit my job, sell my house, and went traveling around the world for a year, ended up in New York. And that was kind of where I started my first business as an entrepreneur. And while working at the 9/11 lawsuits for the city, I also started with a business partner, the first ever gay sports bar in the world, basically. And we've grown that to be over the country, several in the country. So that was kind of interesting. I did some other projects that were centered around diversity. We were concentrated on our business model to make sure that, we had well represented even in the gay community and with different races, religions, and understanding how important that was to our workplace. And we're really able to move that and press that forward. And that was, I think, one of the attractive parts about our businesses. I worked in consulting with other businesses as a lawyer throughout this time. Even helped do some nonprofits, build in the gay sports world, kind of with my background in sports. I came back home to Minnesota, 2012, got married to my husband, who's African American. We're both politically active. I'm currently at a Sapentia law firm, which is a group of attorneys who are I think all came from the big firm backgrounds. In 2020, we received the Diversity Award for the Twin Cities in the Law magazine. So one of the reasons that attracted me to that group was their commitment to diversity and understanding. We're part of the National Association of Women and Minority-Owned Law Firms, and actively participate in Twin Cities diversity in practice. So my background, so even though I kind of look like an old white guy, actually have seen a lot of the world and really experienced the value of diversity. I'm currently, one of the nonprofits I just started was the latest project is equity and environmental education, looking at how BIPOC has access to environmental education, which I think is really important in leading us into the next century especially around climate change and in dealing with environmental justice issues. And I'm working with St. John's Outdoor U and trying to expand their diversity and access to a larger clientele and student base. And now I'm done.
Nick, we need to connect you also with multiple amazing professors, but one that comes to mind too is Corey Gross. She's been doing some work within equity and access within the environmental space and sustainability space. So if you don't know her, you and I can connect later.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. Yes, I love that. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you, Nick. I appreciate that you've really hit your path is meandering, right? And so I think that's one of the pieces, like, why do we do these panels? Like, why do we have fabulous faculty have their students come to these panels on XPO? And some of it's, I think, to normalize the path after graduation with a liberal arts degree. It can meander, like people have a lot of different options. And then I appreciate too the lens of the DEIJ. So who's up after Nick?
I'll follow with
Hey,
a deep breath. Wow, Nick, I want to have coffee with you. All right. So I took some notes. Many of you who know me know that I like to wing it, but I really wanted to stay focused. I'm going to reference some things on my screen. And I'm going to do this in reverse order. I'm going to start with what I'm doing now. And then kind of work backwards to the relevance to St. John's. So I am the new founder and co-owner. I'm the founder and owner of Carla Nezquist Enterprises, which is a coaching and consulting small business, woman-owned. And what do? I help clients who are predominantly historically underrepresented college students build and leverage their strengths and social capital so they achieve their academic and career development goals and improve educational equity. Building out what that looks like with large organizations and coaching students. But if you want to connect with that afterward, feel free to contact Angie or Ethan or myself. I'll make sure you get my email. Not unlike Nick, if you mapped out my trajectory starting from CSBSG to today, you'd witness a lot of unexpected twists and turns, seemingly unrelated jobs, surprises. I'm a salsa dancer, and there's like a lot of salsa dance in here. So starting after college, and then kind of what that pathway looks like, jumping around a bit, I've been a Fulbright research fellow studying gender violence prevention in northern Mexico. And I was the director of a boys and girls club in one of the poorest urban zip codes in the country. I spent time in El Salvador with a social justice project that utilized a video game to foster gender equity. And differently, I taught in a bilingual elementary school classroom. Additionally, I earned a master's degree in social work in El Paso, Texas. And most recently, I worked at CSB SJU admission for 5 years and still have a lot of CSB SJU swag. these experiences grew out of my formation at CSB SJU. So what does that look like? In terms of academic studies, I earned a double major in peace studies and Hispanic studies, and I pursued the minor in Latino and Latin American studies, all of which fit into what I've been doing daily since then. So if you wonder if there's anything applicable to what you're doing after you take that test or do that midterm, the answer is yes. Just look for the opportunities there. And then a lot of significant involvement while I was at CSB SJU. Like Nick said, it really talked about the advantages of liberal arts and the environment at CSB SJU. I really took advantage of many ways to be involved, to both continue long-standing interests of mine and then also discover and try out new things. So I came into college and played as a hockey player, and I played varsity ice hockey for 2 years. Funny thing, when Jeff Anderson, who was my peace studies advisor for a couple of years, asked me, how do I pair penalty minutes in hockey with being a peace studies major? I was like, it's a legal way to take out some aggression without like abusing anyone. And somehow it worked. So varsity ice hockey for 2 years. I sang in the choir for 4 years. I did study abroad for a semester in South America in Chile. I did multiple internships in unrelated areas, which was awesome. Worked in work study all 4 years, served as a resident assistant 1 year, did a senior thesis, and that's what launched me into my immediate next step, which was the Fulbright in Ciudad Juarez in Mexico. And I didn't do all these things at the same time, if you're wondering. One pro tip, it's important to make choices, and we can't do it all, and certainly not all at once. And with that, I pass the mic to Hannah.
Hey, wow, that's powerful, both you and Nick. So I guess I would say if I had to describe my journey, it's been succinct, everything. And as I go along, you guys will kind of see, I kind of like stayed on a particular course. I'll start by saying I'm an international student. So I'm from the Bahamas. And just to give some history, my dad was a Johnny, and I have many relatives that were Johnnies and Bennies. So I came to Minnesota, where I pursued a bachelor's in economics. And just before that, in high school, I knew I always wanted to be an economist. So I would say probably from 2008, when I graduated high school, I was kind of set. So came to St. Ben's, majored in economics. I was also an E-Scholar, entrepreneurship scholar. I think the program is still happening now, not as active as I should be as an E-Scholar alum. Besides that, I was also very, very active on campus. If you guys are familiar with Enactus, back when I was there, it was SIFE, and they were transitioning the name. I was president of the Enactus Club. And at the time I was there, it was really big. It was like 90 something members. We traveled a lot. We competed in a lot of different competitions, traveled all over the US. And so that program, that organization focused a lot on entrepreneurship, which I was also interested in, and I was an E-Scholar at the time, so I kind of tied it in. I was also treasurer for the economics club, which obviously ties into my economics major. We put on different events during my junior and senior year for economic students. So that was pretty interesting. And then on campus, I worked at the International Student Office, and I mentored incoming international bennies, and as well as like Johnnies, like we'd have cross events and stuff like that. So that kind of like was my campus life. It was always, it was very busy. If I was to be honest, it was extremely busy, but it paid off in the end. And I'm going to get to like how it paid off. But I would say in terms of mentorship, in the economics department, I have a professor that I am still pretty cool with today, Parker Wheatley. He was my advisor. And throughout the years, he's always checked in. If I needed him, even with my first job, he wrote my reference letter. And so that really helped me go, the distance, just having him there to coach and say, you can do it. Yeah, this is good for you. So once I graduated from CSB, I immediately went back home to the Bahamas, where I worked for the Central Bank of the Bahamas within the research department. So I worked as a senior statistical assistant. Basically, I produce the debt statistics for the Bahamas as well as the financial sector statistics for the Bahamas. And this would have been the job that Parker actually wrote the reference for. And also a part of this job, I talked about my experience with Enactus. I talked about my experience as an e-scholar, experience just in the economics program. I did an economic development course there that I was able to talk about, as well as my senior thesis. So again, kind of like everything was kind of in line. So maybe I'm just that type of person, but I worked at the Central Bank of Bahamas in research for 4 years. And I must say that we had a lot of Bennies and Johnnies there. I'm talking people who were like maybe 30 years older than me. They were Johnnies and Bennies, and they had like management positions. And so that once a Benny, always a Benny, once a Benny, always a Benny, or once a Johnny, always a Johnny is so correct. It was just amazing to see the network. And I'm like, wait a minute, you're a Johnny? And he was like, yeah, I went there and so, I graduated so. And so it's just interesting to see back in the Bahamas, how diverse we have, like Bennies and Johnnies just in all different industries, but even working at the central bank. So after working there for 4 years, I decided to pursue a master's of science degree in economics, and I went to Drexel in Philadelphia. I did that program for about 2 years. And after graduating, I actually got a job working as a labor economist for the state of Massachusetts. And I was there for about 1.5 years. And again, Parker and I was, we were in touch. I was saying, okay, this is my next step. And, he always encouraged me. And after being there for 1.5 years, there was a position open in Florida. So working for the state of Florida as an economic consultant. And here, what I do, I manage a team of research associates and economists to produce the unemployment rate for the state, as well as the job numbers for the state of Florida. So I manage 2 Bureau of Labor Statistics programs within the state, as well as I would go out and give presentations, talk about what we call like the economic update, because states, they rely heavily on their job numbers and unemployment rate to really talk about, just to really see how well the economy is doing. So that's kind of what I do right now. I love my job. And again, tying it in, like I've had many experiences leading organizations, being in leadership roles, all of these. I even referenced something that happened in Enactus in my interview for the state of Florida, right? So things, they all tie in. So I would say take advantage of whatever activities you have on campus, because I don't think there was one interview that I had not literally referenced back to my time on campus. And my team, I'm actually looking for a research associate. So if anybody's interested, I'm hiring. I can send out the link for that. It closes next week, Tuesday. So I will follow up with you, Angie, on the link. And then shortly I'll be doing interviews after that. So I'll be happy to have you guys on my team if you're interested in economics and producing the key indicators for the state of Florida. So that's it for me, I think.
Yeah, I should connect to, and I think I mentioned to you as panelists, but we have students from Econ 384, which I don't know what the class name is. Tell me quick. Oh, the capstone class for Econ. And then we also have a History 355 class. So we've got kind of a broad mix. So I appreciate you saying it. If it's okay, I'd like to really remind everyone too, exactly what Anthony said of, yes, there's the classes. So of course, in some cases, there's going to be really great examples of class projects or concepts you learned in the academic classroom, but if not forgetting that those pieces outside, like Anthony talked about Enactus, and that even now there were some really great examples of that. And so not forgetting, I think we often in XPD will hear people, I think, make assumptions that they can only talk about paid experiences or academic experiences, but there's a lot of the other pieces of who you are that are really an integral part that you can really bring into an interview. And so remembering that it's really the broad-based piece of who you are that you can bring into the interview. So thank you for that, Anthony. I'm wondering if the three of you, again, in kind of whatever order you want, if we could talk a little bit about, like, what does this concept of embracing diversity in the workplace look like for you? Because obviously everyone here are students. And so that might look like one thing on campus, but what does that look like in the workplace? And from you're of, I like to say different vintages. Nick, you and I are very similar vintage. I was a 97 grad, so you and I should connect because we probably know a whole pile of the same people. But how do you think that's evolved over the course of your career? So what does embracing diversity in the workplace look like, and how do you think that's evolved over the course of your career?
I mean, I can start possibly. So for me, diversity has been interesting because I started a large law firm in the end of the 90s. Oops. And at the time, you can imagine there was very little diversity. It was mostly white old men who were in charge. And I was part of the first law firm I was at. I was the only out gay person in the whole national law firm. It was really kind of strange. But I was so I sat on the diversity committee because of that, I think. And there was a few of us, but mostly not partners, not powerful, that were women and people of color, who really had no seat at the table and really experienced the barriers that existed in moving into those powerful positions, especially because so much of moving to that next step is having clients, and then those are based on relationships that their friends have, and that look like them. And so I think it's been interesting to see over the course of years how that's changed and how people are valuing diversity more, how equity of power has cracked the ceiling a little bit. I don't think we're there even close, but we're starting to see some of that being shared. But again, it's like, even just my husband, who's African-American, outly gay, and he just took the director of DEI position at Catholic Charities, which has never had anyone of color in their leadership for 150 years. And now they started to get he's got an African-American president, so they're starting to look at it. They're starting to deal with it. I think there's many organizations that are valuing that more. But I've seen throughout the years, it's a struggle. I was fortunate because when I created my own businesses, I brought that value to that. And I felt from an entrepreneurial aspect, having more voices at the table and having, being able to look more like our customer base and our clients, then we were able, I think it was the positive economic development as well. For people sometimes want to think of, I think there's lots of different advantages for diversity. And, if you just you're an economics class, look at the economics. I think it's valuable just there. And I'm sure the statistics can back it up. I can give anecdotal evidence for sure, and some hard statistics that I've seen just in my own businesses.
I appreciate that you're talking about it from the really positional lens, or the structural lens in terms of who is in leadership, who's helping to make the decisions. But you're also talking about it from some of the quantitative, like the economic, and qualitative pieces too. So I appreciate that you're talking about that from a few different angles. Carlene and Antonique, I'm curious if you have what your perspective is. I think, Carlene, did that mean Antonique, you can go? Okay.
Okay. For me, I think it's definitely a bit different being both like a female and a woman of color. Economics, as you guys know, it's a male-dominated field, really and truly. And so I felt like every time I went to a new job, or even when I did my master's program, I was just one of two other women in our program. Like, the ratio was crazy. It was probably like 90-something% male. And so I very early on, I felt like I had to realize that I too bring something to the table. I too have a different perspective, right? I have different experiences. And that's sort of like what I sell myself on, even when I interview for positions, or when I'm in the workplace and I have a voice at the table. So I feel like we need more women in economics, more women of color in economics. At times it's been a bit challenging, I must say, because sometimes it's just like, say you have 5 people and you're trying to make a decision and you're the only female at the table. And you're trying to say, well, no, this is why we need to look at this. And males think differently sometimes. But I would say for me, I definitely kept at it though, kept at the helm, not being afraid to be different, not being afraid to have my own opinion. And in my jobs, in my various jobs, I've found that over time, they really grow to appreciate that, the diversity that you do bring. I also, one thing being the youngest on the panel, at least I think I'm the youngest on the panel, is that there's an age gap. Definitely an age gap. Every place I've worked, when I worked at Central Bank, I was the youngest there in the department, and everybody had me about like 10 years. And then I worked at, for the state of Massachusetts, and even here, I'm the youngest manager here. And so for me, wherever I've went, I've sort of been the voice of like the younger generation. This is what we need. This is what we like in the workplace. And so I find more and more that a lot of companies, whether it's government organizations or private firms, they're wanting to know, they're wanting to learn because they want to retain top talent. And so if you have the opportunity to speak up and say, this is what I think this demographic that I represent would like, or this is how to retain, I would say do that because you make a difference for the person coming after you. And then also use that as a selling point. Like if you're different, whether it's, age gaps or you're a person of color or you're female, male, whatever the case is, you have to use that to your vantage point because, perspectives matter. They really do. So that's been sort of like my experience in workplace diversity.
Love that. Thank you. Of really owning what do you uniquely bring? And that can look like a lot of things. And owning it versus seeing it as a detriment.
Yes.
And owning that and really putting that forward. I appreciate that. Thank you, Anthony. Carlene.
I want to highlight two concepts or guiding principles that have really helped me evolve as a practitioner and as an equity skills person. One is a supple mind. And I've always heard about open mind, which I think is such a value principle, but I'm currently serving in AmeriCorps as a tutor in an elementary school in North Minneapolis. And we're going through training right now. And part of the training is equity skills and equity practices. So this is so relevant right now. And literally yesterday, I feel like I'm back in school. And yesterday I learned about the supple mind. And the principle of a supple mind is going beyond an open mind to examining new and old information and asking really important, actionable questions. And the questions that I think of is, should this new thinking, as I'm learning, for example, in a college class or in an internship or an actus or a hockey game or something, I'm learning new thinking. Should I incorporate it into my ways of thinking or habits of mind or ways of being? And kind of conversely, is there less useful thinking that's either new or longstanding that I acquired even unconsciously as a young person or in an encounter on campus, right? Is there less useful thinking that should be removed from my ways of thinking or habits of mind or ways of being? So I think of an open mind as just like really absorbing, right? Kind of being a sponge and taking it in. But the supple mind is really being actionable. Should I incorporate new ways of thinking? Should I shed less useful thinking? And then how do I act accordingly? And then the second principle I've really learned that's guided me as I've moved throughout different careers and industry sectors came from the year that I worked as a professional community organizer in the Phoenix area. And that is the phrase, nothing about me without me. Again, nothing about me without me. And so I think about, as both Nick and Antonique said, whose voice is heard, asking whose voices are silenced, whose voices and opinions are elevated and valued, whose are minimized, and that's something to recognize for myself, and then also listening for others and listening for silence, whose voices are not included in what directs people directly. So yourself as an employee, what directs you what affects you directly that you may or may not have a voice over or be a part of decision making, and then also for other people as you have a part in decision making. And or are aware of what's happening in the workplace and the ways that you're engaged in your community. Nothing about me without me.
I like that. It's both the self-awareness piece. I like kind of in your words, the open mind, like, well, what do I automatically bring in, whether I'm aware of it or not, like, and how do I become more aware of that? And as I learn new things, what pieces do I want to replace? So I like that self-awareness, but also the awareness of the space around you and really stopping to pay attention to that and figuring out how you move within that space. I like that. I'm wondering if the three of you could give some like tips, advice, those feel like such cliche words, but what are ways the fabulous humans in this space can start off on the right foot as they transition from being a student, right? Like there's a piece of what being a student looks like is unique to all of you, but there is a known entity of being a student. And as you move into whatever's next, whether that's volunteer work, whether that's like a employment, whether that's grad school, what, boy, I'm struggling here. What are ways the three of you believe the students in the room can start off on the right foot as they transition from being a student? Carlene's got this one.
I got this one to start with. So I want to highlight two things, and they're short phrases. One is know yourself. And I think Nick and Antonique and I have all been either talking directly, explicitly about this or alluding to this. Observe and examine your thoughts, attitudes, and behaviors, especially what makes you feel uncomfortable. I as Minnesotanites, I'm born and bred in central Minnesota. And although I spent 10 years in about 2 countries and 6 states, that Minnesota nice is pretty embedded in. And so I like to shy away from discomfort as an initial reaction, but that's when it's most important to examine how am I on automatic pilot? And how can I really examine what my habits of mind are and how I want to relate when there are challenging questions about diversity, perspectives that I'm not familiar with. That said, I'm not suggesting that you become a harsh critic of yourself or judging your every action for how good or not good it was. Instead, I want to encourage you to be curious about the why. So what that can look like is being thoughtful about what experiences in your family and your community of origin shaped you before you arrived at college, how you came to be at St. Ben's and what shaped you, and be mindful about how you're evolving during college. And then, as we've talked about, I think before, is what are the motivations and assumptions that inspire your words and actions or lurk behind your words and actions? You're like, not so proud of that one. And do your words and actions match your intentions? So again, knowing yourself, observing yourself, and that can be done in any situation. You can talk about it, you can journal about it, you can do a note on your phone, you can do it when you're on the link, you can snap about it. Like there's an endless way, there are endless ways to do that. And you're never done. So just keep at it. The second one is to seek and build authentic relationships. I'm not talking about the St. Ben, St. John's. Oh, hi, how are you doing? I'm great. Good. I'm great. Do you want to do brunch together? Awesome. Done. Right? Like seeking and building authentic relationships can start with that. Like, hey, I'm sitting next to you on the link, or hey, we're sitting next to each other in class. But I want to highlight a quote from the organization I work for with the Reading and Math Corps of Minnesota. That's my AmeriCorps position. Their diversity, equity, and inclusion statement is grounded in relationships. So their statement states, relationships are the containers in which meaningful change occurs. I'll say that again. Relationships are the containers in which meaningful change occurs. We invest in relationships. We work to ensure that all humans are seen, heard, and valued. And then to achieve this, we commit to acknowledging the power we hold and stewarding that power in ways that dismantle systemic and individual injustice. So if that's the vision, that's the end goal, is dismantling systemic and individual injustice. The way we do that to create meaningful change are relationships. We can't do that as islands. We can't do that just in our minds, thinking about it or talking about it. We need to be in relationship with others.
I love that. That speaks to me in the sense at a different institution I taught at in the leadership minor, and one of our sayings was relationships are the currency of power. And so, I mean, that can look in a lot of different things, but that authentic relationship building is the absolute kind of cornerstone. And so I completely appreciate those couple of tips, and really asking the why, being curious about the why. I love the do your words and actions meet your intent. Antonique and Nick, you're up.
Okay. Good, I can go. So for me, I would say I had to be very much intentional to get to the point that I'm at. You would find, like, for example, even if you guys, as economics majors, you wanted to do a particular internship, and they're like, oh, they have a million sort of like prerequisites before you can even do an internship in economics, right? And like I said, I knew from high school I wanted to be an economist. So I really admire Nick's and Carlene's like perspective, but for those who are on a more like rigid course, I would say you definitely have to kind of like know what your end game is. What your end game is in terms of like, what do you want to be? If you want to be a housewife, because at some point I really did want to be a housewife. If you want to be a housewife or a house husband, that's completely fine, right? But what's your end game? How are you going to get to that? And a part of, getting to your end game is knowing what you have. So what I had to do once I was done with St. Ben, St. John's is I had to package everything together, right? Because I had that element where, I was very active on campus. I was, took leadership positions in, various clubs, organizations. Then I had that perspective where I'm an economics major, right? I provide, economic theory, way of thinking. And then I had that another channel where it was like I was a mentor on campus to different young women, as well as put on campus wide events, cultural events. So what I realized is I had to package that right into who Antonique is and what can she do. Right? I don't want you to think I'm just an economics major and I'm going to come and crunch numbers. No, I can come and crunch numbers, and I could do a little cultural event, and I could also be because at the central bank, I ended up we had like different houses. We divided departments into houses, and I was like the team captain for my house. And we put on like different events where we played basketball, we had happy hours and stuff like that. And so I saw myself on that. I'm not just one set thing, but based on all these different experiences, this is me. This is what I can do, and this is how I can take this position from here to here. And if you're on a more rigid, and even if you're not, and you just have sort of like an end game in mind, maybe you just want to be, I don't know, loosey goosey and travel the world. That's still an end game, right? How are you going to achieve that? And the transition for me is knowing everything that I did within that 4-year period, and how it groomed me, and packaging that and being able to sell that, right? What's my pitch? And so I would say, what's your pitch? Right? You're not just an English major, right? You're an English major who did this, that, and you're not just somebody who was on campus washing dishes, right? No, I led the dish line, right? And I'm good at that, and I can do this because I led the dish line. So that would be my one advice: knowing all of your experiences and really being able to package that and sell that. I had a friend when I was at Drexel. He was a theology major, and he was up for a job at a consultant firm, like Boston consultant firm. And, you think in theology, like they usually get the hard hitting, like STEM degrees, but he was able to package himself because as a theology major, you have to think differently. Right. So he was able to say, this is what I have, and this is why I'm the package for that position. And so no matter what your major is or what your experiences is, bring it all together and then create a package for yourself. So that's my suggestion on transitioning.
I love that. It's a different way of looking. Carlene talked about knowing yourself in a little bit of a different capacity. And so you're talking about knowing yourself and pulling all those pieces together. I will plug XPD, right? Because I'm going to. And so don't forget, if you're just like, but I don't know what that unique piece is, come work with us. We can help you start to frame that, because sometimes too, you might get to know someone else in Actis or kind of whatever organization. And so it might seem like, well, everyone around me is doing the same stuff. But we can help from an external view of being like, actually, here's what I'm seeing, here's what I'm hearing you say. So we can help you with that as well. So I had to do an XPD plug. But Nick, I also see you nodding, so I'm muting myself. It's all you.
Oh, good. Brilliant words of advice from both you two. I really appreciate it. for me, I was the first in my family to go to college, and I grew up in a small town, small smart farming town for the most part. So going into college, I knew I liked math and I was really good at math and science, but I really didn't know even what possibilities were in the world, let alone what my major should be. And so I really felt like St. John's allowed me to have, St. John's, St. Ben's allowed me to have an experience of exploring, especially at its liberal arts university, take that for advantages and find, and I really like the idea of finding the package that you want to take from experiences and take everything from an experience that you can. And, because I actually got recruited to play basketball there, but I was burned out of basketball and I always had passion for volleyball, but guys didn't get to play volleyball where I grew up, and it was a girls' sport. And so I found volleyball, and we had a club sport, and we ended up going to the getting second at nationals. And because of my passion, I convinced the St. Ben's coach to let me be a work study assistant to the varsity program. And I, for 3 years, was the assistant coach at St. Ben's and leading an NCAA. We went to the, tournament and everything. So it was finding those other opportunities. Also worked in the library, and I was a teaching assistant for the chemistry department. So then afterwards, I was like, well, what should I do? Should I get a PhD in science? Or I took a year off and tried to figure that out. I was at the Minneapolis athletic department. I was an assistant athletic director there. Totally not aligned with what my major was, but it aligned with some of my passions for. And from there, I met a lot of judges and lawyers, and I kind of found that path of like, maybe that's something that I enjoy. I love advocacy and everything. So to me is, I like the idea of don't be afraid of experiences. Take everything you can out of the experience. Like if you can, be more of a leader, but also understand that sometimes it's good to sit back and let others lead and learn from the experiences that they have to share. Don't be afraid to fail. Take calculated risks. I think people often are stuck and are too afraid to fail, and so they don't move forward. And so I think especially when you're a young person and like, maybe I have an interest in something, but maybe I'm not good at that. You don't even know sometimes if you're good at that or not. Don't be afraid to try and do something, like from a sports analogy, you miss every shot you don't try to take, so like, if you don't try, you'll never know if you're good at it or not. And I was recently on a panel with some younger people trying to figure out, well, what should my major be? I feel like a lot of people I know, their majors, they have nothing to do with their degrees. They're doing stuff that has nothing to do with their degrees, or, I don't know enough about the world to figure out what I want to do. And I don't even know what the jobs are going to be like in 10 years, so I think don't feel that oppression of or that pressure, just embrace learning. And to me, I always say the most important thing is learn how to communicate, learn how to write, learn how to critically think, learn how to listen and absorb other people's ideas, and be open to ideas. I love the idea of, not necessarily an open mind, but and I forgot the word now, the tangible mind or the whatever the word was, but I like that idea because, you don't know what life's going to bring you. You don't know what the world's going to change. You don't know all these things, but you can accumulate skills and package those skills from all the experiences you have to make yourself a valuable person and to find joy in what you do.
I like that. Some of that, what you talked about connects, well, of course, to what both Carlene and Antonique talked about, where Antonique, you were talking about like this linear path, but there's other pieces. And what all of you have talked about is what I think those of us, and once you're out, recognize as pieces you just get as part of a liberal arts institution. But I think we don't necessarily talk about enough, right? And Nick, you mentioned them. It's the critical thinking. Can you take a piece? I mean, I know, Antonique, you do this in your job. Carlene, I know you well enough that I'm a bajillion% sure, but it's the critical thinking of how do I take mass quantities of data and synthesize it? How do I communicate that, whether it's verbal or in writing? How do I problem solve? Nick, I appreciate you said, how do I listen? Those are all pieces. You are doing that here. Like, think about the projects you're doing in Jonathan and Sucharita's classes, and other classes you're taking. You're doing those things. You are practicing and building and developing the critical thinking, the listening, the communication. And so that's what applying it out. So I appreciate you all mentioned that. We have a couple minutes, so if it's okay, I want to flip it. And I know you all on my screen and the big screen can't see. So what I want to do is I want to flip and give our fabulous people in the audience a chance to ask questions. And then I'll repeat it in the microphone so the three of you can speak. Yes.
This one's for Nick. So he said he took a year off after 9/11 and kind of traveled the world. So I want to know how that changed his perspective on the workplace and what were the challenges of coming back.
So Nick, you talked about traveling after 9/11. And so what our fabulous first question asker wants to know is how did that change your perspective as well as in the workplace? Did I summarize that kind of okay?
Yeah. It was invaluable because I was involved in a lot of things in school. I didn't take advantage of the opportunity to study abroad, but it was a passion of mine to travel. And so oddly, I waited till I was until I turned 30 to go travel around the world, but it shaped my perspective on so many different things because I traveled for 14 months total, spent multiple months, a lot of times in several different locations, from spending about 2 months in Africa. I was even during the Iraq War, I was in Israel and Jordan and Palestine, Vietnam. Vietnam was a really interesting perspective. And I ended up living in Brazil for a while at the end. But to me, it's like just seeing how other people live, how other people's values differ from our own, getting a perspective of what is economy and the different world view of, what is comfort, what is essential to our being. I mean, literally when I was traveling, I think I had a carry-on roll suitcase, a backpack, and a computer bag. And I periodically would change out things as I, went above, but you realize like how much do you need in the world too. And so to me, it was really important to learn different cultures, see different perspectives. And then I bring that into my work that I've done ever since, is appreciating that value and the perspectives and gives you an idea that there isn't always one way to do things. There are actually many ways to do things. And a lot of times it's important to think about different perspectives and embrace those different ideas.
I hear some overlap even, and I hear a connection between some of the language Carlene was using about the open mind too, in terms of, okay, well, there's different ways of being. So what of the pieces do I want to replace with some of the ways I've learned? And I'm hearing you, I'm seeing some connections between what you're saying. I don't want to like force the connections, but those are some of the connections I am hearing too. So thank you for your first question. Does that feel like that? Yep, we got a thumbs up. So we have time for one or two more. What else would you love to hear from our one or all of our alums? And I'm really comfortable with uncomfortable silence. So, and I know some of your names. Who has the next question? Go for it. I see. Yeah. So Antonique, this one was primarily aimed at you in terms of what were some of the differences you saw between being in the Bahamas versus where you're currently located in terms of kind of navigating economics and what some of that world of work looked like in a different capacity. Right, Shirley?
That's a very good question. The thing about it, I would say, is not a huge amount of difference, because what you'll find is economics anywhere you go. You're going to find that, you have the same set, even though the data set might not be the same, you have the same sort of like line, right? You have to synthesize your data. You have to analyze your data. You have to publish your data, right? Then you have to answer to, for me, when I was at the Central Bank of the Bahamas, I answered to the governor of the central bank and the minister of finance and the prime minister. But here in Florida, I answered to the director of my agency as well as the governor of the state, Ron DeSantis. So for me, it wasn't that much of a difference. You know, the Bahamas is a bit more different in terms of like it's chill. It's a bit chill, but I would say I didn't see like huge amount of difference, and I think that's why I'm able to succeed. You know, whether I was in Boston or being in Florida or being in the Bahamas, because like in economics, once you're an economist and you know how to analyze data, you kind of have the same set. And to be fair, if I was probably at a private firm, it may be slightly different, but working for government straight across the board, it's kind of the same, I would say.
Yeah, Nick, if you can talk about what was it like to be starting this new venture, especially as one, like what obstacles did you face, especially as one of the first gay sports bars?
So yes, the first obstacle was, and I was in a unique position because we're in Manhattan, New York. So it's, you know, one of the most competitive economic environments in the world, possibly. And my business partner had background in the hospitality industry. I had more of the legal background, IP, you know, economics, in terms of from my experience as an attorney. And we just kind of brought it together. And, you know, at first we faced a lot of adversity. Like people are like, a gay sports bar, what are you going to just show figure skating? You know, they weren't really aware of the diversity of the community at the time. And it ended up being, you know, very, very successful, and, you know, and turning a lot of stereotypes on their head, which I think was great. But, you know, I'll be honest, in New York City, you know, everyone's like, well, do you have to deal with the mob or anything like that? And no, it was a lot of it was government and, you know, navigating the regulations and the, you know, figuring all that out in terms of, you know, the different rules and laws, and, you know, and so it was a fun exercise for me in some ways, because I appreciate the, you know, the way that my training and my education had helped me in that regard. But then it's just the effort of trying to navigate and managing, you know, especially as a smaller business that you end up growing, is, you know, you're doing everything. You have all your hats. You have marketing, PR, operations, legal, you know, so you have the beauty of it is that, you know, I guess people have always called me the Renaissance man, because I've always been really busy, and I like to have lots of different things going on to keep me like stimulated, so to speak, and keep my mind going. So I've always been that way. So to me, it was helpful to be, when I have a problem sometimes is when I have only one thing to think about, then I have a hard time focusing. So when I have many things to think about, that's one thing that's been a benefit for me. So then you know, so your career can take different pathways that way too. But it was challenging and it was fun. And, you know, one thing about being an entrepreneur is there's always new challenges and new projects. And so that's fun for me to kind of dive into different areas and explore those things.
Thank you. And I am aware of the time, and so I know people here have class to get to. I want to thank Carlene, Antonique, Nick, truly from the bottom of our hearts. Like, thank you for connecting back to some of our current students. Students, make sure you do sign in at the back. And if any of you want to get in contact with any of these alums, just connect with XPD and we'll help make that connection. So thank you again to the three of you. You're all amazing.